Leading stories, trending topics, changing narratives. You're listening to the Critical Conversations podcast.
We back. Yeah. That's right. Welcome back to the Critical Conversations podcast, everybody. I go by the name of Dr. Rick Daniels, Director of Institutional Equity and Inclusion, right here at Oakton College. And this is season three. Season three. Already. And I want to kick it off by saying how grateful I am and how thankful I am for anyone who's ever listened, anyone who's ever subscribed, anyone who's ever sent a message or stopped me in the hallway. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I am excited about season 3. I'm excited because we are about to be more consistent. We are about to cover a wider variety of topics. And at the end of the day, the overall goal is to humanize the conversation that we have around DEI. I don't know about you, but I'm not giving up on DEI. I am not giving up on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can't make me do it. I understand it's risky right now. I understand that there's a lot of things going on, and I stand in solidarity with people whose lives have been affected just to be able to do this work. But if I give up now, if you give up now, we could affect generations, people that we may never meet. So if you're listening to this podcast, that means that you are at least somewhat interested in doing the work to create spaces where we can all thrive and we can be our authentic selves. That's why this season we're going to start something new. A series called Who Switched My Code? A Journey in Social Adaptability. We're going to cover certain topics such as tokenism, imposter syndrome, and even the ways in which we show up in spaces that impact how we do our work every day. The first concept that we're going to explore in the Who Switched My Code series is tokenism. Now, I could offer a textbook definition of tokenism, but instead, I'm going to give you my perspective, but also provide a framework to support that perspective. Now, I believe that tokenism is when you find yourself in situations where you are either the only or one of a few people who represent a particular aspect of your identity. And while I agree and know for certain that it affects communities to varying degrees, I also believe it's something that we can all relate to at some point in our lives. And that's why it's important to start here. And so I'm going to talk about my tokenism journey in 3 phases. The first is the adaptive phase. The second is the reactive phase. And the third is the representation phase. So I want to start this off in 2005, 20 years ago, University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Shout out Whitewater. Whitewater was the HBCU of Wisconsin. And if you're listening, you might agree with that. We were a tight-knit community, but it was still a predominantly white institution nonetheless. And so I find myself being in that position a lot. I remember my sophomore year, I was a tour guide. I was a campus assistant. I really took a lot of great pride in that job, and I loved it. But some reason, I always felt like I ended up giving tours to groups that had mostly people of color. Now, I enjoyed this, of course, but it made me think, why am I always assigned to groups that have mostly people of color? So I remember walking into my director's office one day and I asked him, I told him I said, listen, I feel like I'm the token black guy. And he looked at me square in my face and said, that's because you are the token black guy, Rick. Then he gonna have the nerve to ask me, is that really such a bad thing? It felt like I had been stung by a bee. I mean, immediate sensations of loneliness, maybe even a little bit of regret for ending up in that position. And in fairness to the director, he was a great guy and a mentor at the time, but his question somehow made me just accept that maybe I was the token black guy. And maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe he was right. Maybe I could use this to my advantage somehow. So I bought in. I drank the Kool-Aid. You see, I was in what's called the adaptive phase of my journey. And that phase is one where you adjust your identity to blend into different environments. And while that may be considered diverse or versatile, some may call themselves a chameleon, if you will, it often comes at the full cost of our authenticity. You see, this kind of tokenism comes from a sort of a survival instinct, but it causes people to prey on your weaknesses. So I stayed in that adaptive phase pretty much throughout my entire college career, and then I became a professional. Now in phase 2, this is called the reactive phase, because now I'm a professional, and I happen to be working at my alma mater. If you've ever worked at your alma mater, especially right after you graduated like I did, it almost feels like you're living in your parents' house as an adult. Now I know what that feels like, and I'm sure my son is experiencing that right now. But it can be a little daunting to feel like the people that watched you grow didn't always appreciate that growth. And maybe you felt like you've outgrown the space. And while you might still have love for them and for the area, you're starting to feel those growing pains. You see, at this point, I had bought into the adaptive phase and thought that it was going to work for me in my professional journey. But then I realized that I was trying to get as close to proximity to whiteness as possible. I wanted to do everything I could to prove that I could be a professional. And in order to do that, I had to sacrifice certain parts of who I was. But then I realized that it wasn't working for me. And not only was it not working for me, but it was eating away at my soul. And this caused me to enter into a reactive phase of tokenism where I accepted that I no longer wanted to be in that space. And I became comfortable with my various parts of my identity, but then I started to weaponize those identities in dominant spaces to challenge dominant norms. And so I would weaponize my blackness. I would weaponize my gender. I would weaponize my youth so that I could tear down some of these dominant norms that caused people to feel like I felt when I was in the reactive phase. Now, at first, this was liberating, but then that started to eat away at me too. You see, I was a bit of a rebel. They got this thing called business comfortable now, where it's like you can, dress down a little bit, but still dress professionally. You see, I was doing that before it was cool. I was wearing tennis shoes before it was cool. See, at this point, I'm at a different journey now, at a different institution and a higher level position. And I never forget, there's a good person out there, consider him to be a mentor even to this day. But I'll never forget the first time he saw me wear tennis shoes to work. And he looked at me like a big brother looks at a little brother, and he looked at me and said, "Boy, have you lost your mind?" And then he gonna have the nerve to ask me, "I know you don't think you're gonna be a VP coming to work looking like that." I just calmly walked away. But deep inside, I was happy. I was elated that I could evoke so much emotion from people just by the way I showed up. But you see, that bold and assertive way of inserting myself into every space that I walked into started to become exhausting, taxing even. And it started to impact my attitude and how I showed up every day, which then impacted my quality of work. And so I started to unpack that a little bit and determine that it really was just a coping mechanism for the pain that I was feeling at the time. And this is where I entered into the third phase of my tokenism journey, and that's the representation phase. This came during my doctoral period when, once again, I was one of a few and one of the only. I was only one of 2 black people in the program, and I was the only black male. But instead of just adapting and assimilating to the environment, instead of just reacting to it and boldly asserting myself in unhealthy ways, I decided, you know what? I'm going to represent. I'm going to be a representative of not just myself, but my ancestors and the people who came before me and the people who will come after me. You see, it stopped becoming more about a personal coping mechanism and more of a leadership stance. So that no matter what space I'm in, I will always be my authentic self, but I will always represent for the greater cause. And so I ask you, have you ever been through a tokenism journey? Can you identify with any of the stories that I've mentioned today? Have you ever had to hide yourself or turn down the volume just to fit in certain spaces? Have you ever pushed yourself and pushed back to show up as your full authentic self, even if it hurt? And how are you using your identity as your power? I don't have the answers to these questions, but I bet you do. We'll see you next time.
The Critical Conversations podcast is recorded at Oakton College, located at 1600 East Gulf Road, Des Plaines, Illinois. The show is sponsored in part by the Oakton College Educational Foundation, produced by Erick Rohn, coordinated by Brenda Cruz, and hosted by Dr. Rick Daniels. For more information or to connect with us, email critsconpod@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for more critical conversations.